December 21st, 1949, a cramped interrogation room in the War Office, London. Klaus Fuchs sat across from William Scarden, a quiet man from MI5 who specialized in breaking spies without ever raising his voice. Scarden slid a photograph across the table, a blurry surveillance image of Fuchs meeting a man on a street corner in New York. Fuchs stared at the photo for 17 seconds without blinking. Scarden asked him a simple question. "Do you recognize this person?" Fuchs looked up and said words that would change the Cold War forever. "Yes, that's Harry Gold. He was my Soviet contact." Just like that, the man who had given Stalin the atomic bomb had confessed. Think about what just happened in that room. Klaus Fuchs wasn't some low-level technician who had stolen a few documents. He was a senior physicist at Los Alamos who had handed the Soviets the complete design specifications for America's plutonium bomb. He had attended meetings where J. Robert Oppenheimer discussed the most classified weapon in human history. And when confronted with a single photograph, he confessed to everything within 30 seconds. No lawyer present, no negotiation. Just a calm admission that he had committed the greatest act of espionage in the 20th century. Scarden left that interrogation room knowing the Americans would demand Fuchs's execution. What Scarden didn't know yet was that Britain would release him in less than a decade. But what made Klaus Fuchs's confession even more devastating was the timeline Scarden was about to uncover. The Soviets had detonated their first atomic bomb on August 29, 1949, just 4 months earlier. American intelligence had predicted the Soviets wouldn't have a working bomb until 1953 at the earliest. President Truman had stood in the Oval Office reading the report in disbelief. 4 years ahead of schedule. Now, Scarden understood why. Klaus Fuchs had handed Igor Kurchatov, the head of the Soviet nuclear program, every calculation needed to skip years of trial and error. The man sitting across from Scarden had personally accelerated the nuclear arms race and made World War III possible. Think about that irony. The United States had spent $2 billion and employed 130,000 people to build the atomic bomb in complete secrecy. The Manhattan Project was the most expensive and classified military program in American history, and a single German refugee scientist had undermined all of it by passing documents to the Soviets for free. Fuchs hadn't been paid. He hadn't been blackmailed. He had betrayed the atomic bomb project because he believed the Soviet Union deserved nuclear weapons as much as America did. That ideological conviction would reshape global power for the next 40 years. Quick reminder, if you're binging these Cold War spy stories, hit subscribe. We post 3 untold espionage secrets every week. Over 500 history enthusiasts have already joined this month. Don't miss the next shocking discovery about the spy who infiltrated the CIA itself. Klaus Fuchs entered the world of nuclear physics through a combination of brilliance, tragedy, and ideology. Born in 1911 in Rüsselsheim, Germany, Fuchs was the son of a Lutheran pastor who raised his children with strict moral principles. But Fuchs rejected his father's Christianity and embraced communism while studying physics at the University of Leipzig. By 1932, he had joined the Communist Party of Germany and was organizing student protests against the rising Nazi movement. When Hitler seized power in 1933, Fuchs became a marked man. The Gestapo raided communist meeting halls across Germany. Fuchs fled to France, then to Britain, carrying nothing but his physics research papers and his Communist Party membership card. Britain in 1933 welcomed German refugees with scientific credentials. Fuchs enrolled at the University of Bristol and continued his doctoral research in theoretical physics. His professors noticed 2 things immediately. First, Fuchs was exceptionally talented. His work on quantum mechanics was groundbreaking. Second, he never discussed his politics with anyone. While other German refugees debated Marxism in coffee shops, Fuchs kept silent. He completed his PhD in 1937 and moved to the University of Edinburgh to work under Max Born, one of the founders of quantum mechanics.
By 1939, Fuchs had published papers that established him as one of the most promising young physicists in Britain. But Fuchs had a secret that none of his professors knew. In 1941, Soviet intelligence approached him through the German Communist Party's underground network in Britain. An NKVD agent named Ursula Puszczynski, codenamed Sonia, made contact while Fuchs was working at the University of Birmingham. She didn't threaten him. She didn't offer money. She simply asked if Fuchs believed the Soviet Union should be denied the scientific knowledge that Britain and America were developing. Fuchs said no. That single conversation turned him into one of the most damaging spies in history. He agreed to pass information to the Soviets immediately.
Here's what makes Fuchs different from other spies. He wasn't recruited through blackmail or financial desperation. He wasn't a double agent playing both sides. Klaus Fuchs was an ideological spy who genuinely believed that nuclear weapons should not be monopolized by capitalist nations. He saw himself as correcting an imbalance that would lead to Western domination of the post-war world. In his mind, giving Stalin the atomic bomb wasn't treason, it was justice. That conviction would make him impossible to detect for 8 years. In 1941, Britain began serious research into atomic weapons through a program codenamed tube alloys. Fuchs was recruited to work on gaseous diffusion, a method for enriching uranium. His security clearance came through without objection despite his German citizenship and communist past. British intelligence had a file on Fuchs, noting his Communist Party membership in Germany, but the vetting officer dismissed it as youthful idealism. The report concluded Fuchs appears to have severed all political connections and is fully focused on his scientific work. That assessment was catastrophically wrong. Fuchs was already passing tube alloys documents to Sonia every month. By 1943, Britain's atomic research had been absorbed into the Manhattan Project. The United States was building industrial-scale facilities to produce weapons-grade uranium and plutonium. Britain sent its best scientists to assist, including Klaus Fuchs. In December 1943, Fuchs arrived in New York carrying a British security clearance and a letter of introduction from Tube Alloy's leadership. American officials processed his paperwork and assigned him to the Theoretical Physics Division. Nobody ran an independent background check. Nobody questioned why a German communist refugee had been given access to the most classified military program in American history. Fuchs looked at the Manhattan Project and saw an organization with brilliant scientists and terrible security. Researchers discussed classified calculations in open cafeterias. Documents were left on desks overnight. Security focused on external threats, German or Japanese spies trying to penetrate the facilities. Nobody was looking for internal threats from scientists who already had clearance. Fuchs realized he could access nearly any document he wanted simply by asking colleagues for information related to his assigned research. The Americans had built a security system designed to keep secrets from outsiders. They never imagined that one of their own physicists would systematically betray them. In February 1944, Fuchs made contact with Soviet intelligence in New York. He met Harry Gold, a chemist who worked as a courier for the NKVD on a street corner in the Lower East Side. Gold was nervous and awkward. He had never handled a source as valuable as Fuchs before. Fuchs handed him a manila envelope containing preliminary calculations on the implosion method for detonating a plutonium bomb. Gold asked Fuchs when they should meet again. Fuchs said, every month until the bomb is finished. That conversation marked the beginning of the most damaging intelligence transfer of the 20th century. Think about what Fuchs just committed to. He wasn't passing occasional scraps of information to justify his ideological beliefs. He was promising to deliver systematic, ongoing intelligence on every aspect of the American atomic bomb program. For the next 18 months, Klaus Fuchs would function as Igor Kurchatov's inside man at Los Alamos. Every breakthrough the Americans made would be transmitted to Moscow within weeks. The Soviets were about to receive a complete blueprint for building nuclear weapons without conducting a single test of their own. The first documents Fuchs passed to Harry Gold were devastating. He provided detailed calculations on the critical mass required for a plutonium chain reaction. He explained the implosion lens design that would compress the plutonium core symmetrically. He included handwritten notes on the specific explosives being tested at Los Alamos. Soviet physicists had been working on similar concepts, but Fuchs's intelligence eliminated years of trial and error.
Kurchatov read Fuchs's reports in Moscow and told Lavrentiy Beria, the head of the Soviet atomic program, "This is exactly what we needed. This source is invaluable." American security officials had no idea they were hemorrhaging secrets. The Manhattan Project employed its own intelligence division tasked with monitoring personnel and detecting security breaches. But the counterintelligence team focused on preventing information from leaving the facilities through mail or phone calls. They never monitored what scientists carried out in their heads. Fuchs didn't need to steal documents. He memorized technical specifications during work hours and reconstructed them from memory during meetings with Harry Gold. By the time security officials realized this vulnerability, Fuchs had already passed enough information to build 3 different bomb designs. In August 1944, Fuchs transferred to Los Alamos, New Mexico, the central laboratory where the atomic bomb was being assembled. J. Robert Oppenheimer welcomed Fuchs personally. Oppenheimer knew Fuchs's reputation as a brilliant theorist and assigned him to the implosion division working under Hans Bethe. Fuchs now had access to the most classified calculations in the Manhattan Project. He attended meetings where scientists debated whether the plutonium bomb would work. He reviewed test data from explosive lens experiments. He knew the bomb's exact yield predictions before most American military officers did.
Here's what makes Fuchs's espionage so methodical. He didn't steal randomly. He targeted information that would be most valuable to Soviet physicists trying to replicate American success. After each major breakthrough at Los Alamos, Fuchs scheduled a meeting with Harry Gold in Santa Fe or Albuquerque. He handed over written summaries of the latest technical developments. Gold transported the documents to New York, where Soviet intelligence photographed them and transmitted the contents to Moscow via diplomatic pouch. Within 6 weeks of each American breakthrough, Soviet scientists were working on identical designs. By February 1945, Fuchs had given the Soviets enough information to build a working atomic bomb. He provided the final specifications for the plutonium implosion device that would be tested at Trinity Site in July 1945. He explained the precise timing required for the explosive lenses. He included the calculated yield, approximately 20 kilotons. Kurchatov showed these documents to Stalin personally. Stalin read Fuchs's technical summary and asked Kurchatov one question: "How long until we can build this?" Kurchatov estimated 4 years. Stalin demanded it in 3. Fuchs had just triggered the nuclear arms race. But what Fuchs didn't fully understand was that his espionage was part of a larger Soviet intelligence operation targeting the Manhattan Project. The NKVD had recruited multiple sources inside Los Alamos, including David Greenglass, a machinist who provided drawings of the implosion bomb, and Theodore Hall, a physicist who independently contacted Soviet intelligence. But Fuchs was the most valuable source because of his seniority and access. While Greenglass and Hall provided fragments, Fuchs provided systematic technical education. Soviet intelligence gave him the code name Charles and prioritized his reports above all other Manhattan Project sources. In June 1945, Fuchs attended a final meeting with Harry Gold in Santa Fe. He handed over a complete report on the Trinity test preparations, including the expected yield and detonation height. Gold asked Fuchs if he expected the bomb to work. Fuchs said, "It will work. The calculations are correct." 3 weeks later, on July 16, 1945, the Trinity device detonated with a yield of 21 kilotons, exactly as Fuchs had predicted. Oppenheimer watched the explosion and quoted the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Klaus Fuchs watched the same explosion, knowing he had already given that power to Joseph Stalin. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, the Manhattan Project began shutting down its wartime operations. Fuchs returned to Britain in 1946 to work at the Harwell Atomic Research Establishment, where Britain was developing its own nuclear weapons program. Soviet intelligence maintained contact through new handlers in London. Fuchs continued passing information on British bomb designs and reactor technology. He wasn't done spying, he had simply changed employers.
For the next 3 years, Klaus Fuchs functioned as the Soviet Union's inside source on Western nuclear development. But what American and British intelligence were closing in on without Fuchs knowing it. In 1946, the United States Army's Signal Intelligence Service began a secret program called Venona, an effort to decrypt Soviet intelligence communications from the 1940s. The decryption work was painstakingly slow. Soviet cryptographers had used one-time pads that were nearly impossible to break. But in 1948, Venona analysts identified fragments of messages discussing an NKVD source, codenamed Charles, who had worked at Los Alamos. The decrypted messages mentioned technical details that only a senior physicist could have known. By mid-1949, Venona analysts were certain that Charles was someone in the British contingent at Los Alamos. FBI and MI5 investigators cross-referenced the decrypted Venona cables with personnel records from Los Alamos. They identified a short list of British scientists who had the necessary access and expertise. Fuchs's name appeared on that list. His Communist Party background in Germany raised immediate red flags. In October 1949, MI5 opened a formal investigation. They placed Fuchs under surveillance and monitored his movements. But Fuchs had no idea he was being watched. He continued his work at Harwell, completely unaware that every phone call and meeting was being documented. On December 21, 1949, William Skardon sat down with Klaus Fuchs for what Fuchs believed would be a routine security interview. Skardon didn't accuse Fuchs of anything. He asked polite questions about Fuchs's background and political beliefs. Fuchs answered calmly. Then Skardon showed Fuchs the surveillance photograph of his meeting with Harry Gold. Fuchs stared at the image for 17 seconds. Skardon watched Fuchs's face and saw something break. Fuchs looked up and said, "Yes, that's Harry Gold. He was my Soviet contact." Skardon didn't show emotion. He simply asked, "When did it start?" Fuchs began talking. He confessed to everything. Over the next month, Klaus Fuchs gave MI5 investigators a complete account of his espionage. He described every meeting with Soviet handlers. He detailed every document he had passed. He explained his ideological motivations without apology. Fuchs told investigators that he had never been paid or blackmailed. He had spied because he believed the Soviet Union deserved access to atomic weapons. When asked if he regretted his actions, Fuchs said only, "I acted according to my conscience at the time. History will judge whether I was right." That statement would become the most controversial aspect of his entire case. British prosecutors faced an immediate problem. Fuchs had confessed voluntarily, but most of his espionage had occurred in the United States under American jurisdiction. The FBI demanded extradition so Fuchs could be tried in America under the Espionage Act, which carried the death penalty. But Britain refused. Fuchs was a British citizen, arrested on British soil, and would be tried under British law. The maximum sentence under Britain's Official Secrets Act was 14 years. American officials were furious. Klaus Fuchs had given Stalin the atomic bomb, and Britain was treating it like a paperwork violation. Fuchs's trial began on March 1, 1950, at the Old Bailey in London. The proceedings lasted less than 90 minutes. Fuchs pled guilty to 4 counts of violating the Official Secrets Act. His attorney made no defense. The prosecutor read a summary of Fuchs's confession into the record. The judge, Lord Goddard, called Fuchs's actions the grossest form of treachery and sentenced him to 14 years in prison, the maximum allowed under British law. Fuchs showed no emotion. He was led from the courtroom and transported to Wormwood Scrubbs Prison in London. The entire trial had taken less time than some Manhattan Project meetings Fuchs had attended. By the way, 95% of you watching this aren't subscribed yet. If you've made it this far, you clearly like this content. Click subscribe so YouTube shows you our next video about the double agent who betrayed both the Soviets and the Americans during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Think about the absurdity of that sentence. Klaus Fuchs had accelerated Soviet nuclear capability by years, triggered the nuclear arms race, and fundamentally altered the balance of power in the Cold War. American officials estimated his espionage had cost the United States years of strategic advantage and billions of dollars in wasted security measures. And Britain had sentenced him to 14 years, the same punishment given to wartime black marketeers and document forgers. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover called it the greatest miscarriage of justice in modern espionage history. But British law didn't allow longer sentences for peacetime espionage. Fuchs would serve his time, quietly, and be released before the decade ended. Fuchs's imprisonment was almost comfortable compared to what American spies faced. He was held in Wakefield Prison in northern England under standard conditions, no isolation, no harsh treatment. He worked in the prison library. He read physics journals that were delivered to his cell. Prison officials later said Fuchs was a model prisoner who never caused trouble or complained about his conditions. Meanwhile, in America, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who had passed far less valuable information to the Soviets, were executed in the electric chair in June 1953. The contrast was stark. Britain imprisoned its atomic spy. America executed its atomic spies. The difference sent a clear message about how each country viewed Cold War espionage. On June 23, 1959, Klaus Fuchs walked out of Wakefield Prison after serving 9 years and 4 months of his sentence. He had been released early for good behavior, a routine reduction under British parole regulations. No fanfare, no press conference. Fuchs collected his belongings, signed his release papers, and left Britain immediately. Within 48 hours, he boarded a flight to East Germany. The communist government welcomed him as a hero. Walter Ulbricht, the East German leader, personally greeted Fuchs and offered him a position at the Institute for Nuclear Research in Rossendorf. Fuchs accepted. The man who had given Stalin the atomic bomb was back in nuclear physics business.
Think about what just happened. The West had imprisoned and released the most damaging atomic spy in history, and he immediately returned to communist-controlled territory to continue nuclear research. American intelligence officials were appalled. CIA Director Allen Dulles wrote in a classified memo, "Fuchs's release and return to Soviet bloc represents a propaganda disaster and security failure of the highest order." But there was nothing the United States could do. Fuchs was a free man under British law and an East German citizen by choice. The Soviets had won again. For the next 30 years, Klaus Fuchs worked as deputy director of the Institute for Nuclear Research in East Germany. He trained the next generation of communist physicists. He consulted on East Germany's nuclear energy program. He published papers on theoretical physics that were read by scientists worldwide. And he never apologized for his espionage. In interviews with East German media, Fuchs defended his actions as morally necessary to prevent American nuclear monopoly. He maintained that giving Stalin the bomb had prevented World War III by ensuring mutual deterrence. Western historians called this justification delusional, but Fuchs never wavered. Here's what Klaus Fuchs never fully grasped. His espionage didn't prevent war through deterrence. It accelerated the arms race and made nuclear war more likely. When the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb in August 1949, American military planners immediately began developing the hydrogen bomb, a weapon 1,000 times more powerful. The Soviets responded with their own hydrogen bomb program. By 1955, both superpowers had arsenals capable of destroying human civilization multiple times over. Fuchs had believed he was creating balance. Instead, he had triggered a nuclear spiral that would dominate global politics for 40 years. The consequences of Fuchs's espionage extended far beyond weapons development. His betrayal directly contributed to the Red Scare paranoia that consumed America in the early 1950s.
When Senator Joseph McCarthy claimed that communists had infiltrated the highest levels of American government, he pointed to Klaus Fuchs as proof. McCarthy used Fuchs's case to justify loyalty oaths, security investigations, and the destruction of thousands of careers. Scientists who had worked alongside Fuchs at Los Alamos found themselves under suspicion. J. Robert Oppenheimer's security clearance was revoked in 1954, partly because he had hired Fuchs without adequate vetting. The man who built the atomic bomb lost his career because of the man who stole it. By 1960, American intelligence had declassified enough Venona intercepts to understand the full scope of Soviet espionage during the Manhattan Project. Fuchs had been one of multiple spies, but he was by far the most damaging. His technical intelligence had allowed Soviet physicists to skip entire stages of development. The CIA estimated that without Fuchs, the Soviet atomic bomb program would have been delayed until at least 1953, giving the United States several additional years of nuclear monopoly. Those years might have changed the outcome of the Korean War, the division of Germany, and the entire trajectory of the Cold War. Historians who later analyzed Fuchs's espionage identified the systemic failures that allowed him to operate undetected for 8 years. The Manhattan Project's security apparatus had focused exclusively on preventing external penetration. Background checks were superficial. Compartmentalization was inconsistent. Scientists with full clearances could access information far beyond their assigned research areas. Fuchs had exploited every one of these vulnerabilities. After his conviction, the United States completely overhauled its security procedures for classified programs. Polygraph tests became mandatory. Background investigations became exhaustive. Compartmentalization became absolute. Every security measure implemented after 1950 was designed to prevent another Klaus Fuchs. But even with these reforms, the fundamental problem remained unsolved. How do you prevent espionage by true believers? Klaus Fuchs wasn't motivated by money, blackmail, or personal grievance. He spied because he genuinely believed his actions were morally justified. Traditional counterintelligence methods, financial monitoring, surveillance, honeypots, were useless against ideological spies. Fuchs had no criminal associates. He maintained no suspicious contacts. He lived modestly and attracted no attention. The only way to catch him was through signal intelligence like Venona, and even that took 4 years of painstaking decryption work.
Klaus Fuchs died on January 28, 1988, in East Berlin at the age of 76. He never returned to the West. He never reconciled with the colleagues he had betrayed. In his final interview, conducted 6 months before his death, Fuchs was asked if he had any regrets. He said only, "I acted according to my understanding of the world situation at the time. I believed that nuclear weapons in the hands of one power alone would lead to catastrophe. Whether I was right or wrong, history has not yet decided." That statement remains the most controversial epitaph in the history of Cold War espionage. The debate over Klaus Fuchs's actions continues among historians. Some argue that his espionage prevented nuclear war by ensuring Soviet-American deterrence sooner rather than later. They point out that the Cold War remained cold precisely because both superpowers had nuclear arsenals that made war unthinkable. Others argue that Fuchs's betrayal extended the Cold War by decades and created the nuclear arms race that brought humanity to the brink of extinction during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Both arguments have merit. Both miss a fundamental truth. Klaus Fuchs had no right to make that decision unilaterally. Think about the arrogance required to commit that act. A single physicist decided that the Soviet Union deserved nuclear weapons and handed Stalin the designs without consulting any democratic institution. Fuchs wasn't elected to make foreign policy decisions. He wasn't authorized to redistribute military secrets. He simply decided his personal ideology was more important than the decisions made by the elected governments of Britain and America. That kind of ideological certainty, the belief that you alone understand what's best for humanity, is more dangerous than any weapon Fuchs helped create. The man who gave Stalin the atomic bomb served less time in prison than many burglars.
He walked free after 9 years and returned to nuclear physics as if nothing had happened. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were executed for doing far less. David Greenglass served 10 years for providing crude sketches. Theodore Hall was never prosecuted at all because the U.S. government didn't want to reveal Venona intercepts in court. But Klaus Fuchs, the spy who changed history, got 14 years reduced to 9 and retired peacefully in communist East Germany. That disparity says everything about the absurdity of Cold War justice.